this episode, we'll go back to January of 1984 and interview David Lee Roth and talk about the iconic album 1984.
No, we struck out again.
Well, we will discuss events, movies, and music from January of 1984.
Hey, Tim. What's happening in January of 1984?
Well, January of 1984 was a pretty exciting month.
Was it now?
I think so. January is an exciting month no matter what, in my opinion. But in January of 84, it was exciting to me because that was when the album by Van Halen, 1984, was released.
Heck yeah.
That album for me was so quintessential. We listened to it so much. My mom had a Toyota Celica, and that cassette was in that cassette player nonstop. And my brother and I forced my mom and our sister to listen to it constantly. But the album itself, it was their sixth studio album. They had a bunch of albums before that. And this one was different because it was an album that they spent a lot more time producing. I think their first couple albums they put together in like 2 weeks. One of them, I think actually their first LP was like 5 days.
Wow.
So they were making music fast, but 84 they put a lot more time into.
I think you can tell too when you listen to the album. It's a complete, I like to call them like studio albums.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, that was when Eddie discovered the keyboards, and I think there was some pushback. They didn't really like the idea of this amazing guitar player setting the guitar down and using a keyboard, but there's so many great elements of, even the intro, the way that the album begins with the keyboards, it's so awesome. I still love it.
I think keyboards were also thought of as a little bit wimpy for a rock band to include too. I know there was a lot of things like Ozzy Osbourne. He has a keyboardist later on, and I remember reading an article when I was a kid, like, well, I have keyboards and it's fine. You can experiment and do different things with it, but it certainly wasn't like Led Zeppelin didn't really use that aspect. So it's different turn for rock and roll.
Definitely. And even when I think of some of the bands that had their keyboard player was prominent, it was like Duran Duran and more sort of pop style music, which for what it's worth, I enjoyed listening to Duran Duran back in the day, but to integrate that into Van Halen, that was sort of a pretty drastic shift in the style. And to your point, I think even at the sort of the level, the execs who are making decisions about what could be on an album, I think there was a lot of that pushback, and Eddie really held his ground and really wanted to do it, and obviously that album is has done pretty well, so I think he made the right decision in not letting the execs take that away and just force it to be a more of a traditional guitar heavy without the keyboards. So.
Yeah, and if you're unfamiliar with this album as a whole, let's just give you some of the names of the songs on this album, because you're going to know the songs. 1984, title self-titling track, but Jump, Panama, Hot for Teacher, those 3 songs alone are just off the charts.
Yeah. And, you mentioned Hot for Teacher. That was a song that, for someone who hasn't heard the song, it's got a really heavy sort of drum intro. And my brother had put the tape into my grandfather's car. My grandfather was a mechanic, so he was always attuned to the sound of his car to make sure, everything was running smoothly. So picture my grandfather hearing this really quick drum intro that when you hear, and if you're thinking about the sound of your car, it very much emulates the sound of a car that is not running smoothly. And so for a brief moment, my grandfather thought, he thought there was something wrong with the car, when in fact it was just the beginning of Hot for Teacher.
That's great. Yeah. And back when MTV used to play videos, who doesn't remember the Hot for Teacher video? I mean, it was just like, when you're 10 or 12 years old, seeing that video, you're like, I want to do that, rock out in my classroom. Have you seen Junior's grades?
Yeah. And even the Waldo character, I mean, it just was, it was very entertaining, as a kid to have, those elements in a video, and with videos being new to us, that just, it was so fun, to see the songs that you love now have a video attached to it, which, today everything has a video attached to it, but back then it was really cool.
They were definitely more purposeful, I think, with the videos. They were more entertaining, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like a mini movie.
Yeah. You remember like the Twisted Sister videos, like, they were just like, we're not going to take it and all that. Again, more of a movie-esque kind of theme to it. Yeah,
and very, very much catered to kids, and that angst of being a teenager, and how can you portray that in a video? And I think they did a really cool job,
Yeah, and I think one aspect of this is definitely back in 1984, rock music was definitely perceived as bad, right? It had that element of, tied to heavy metal, tied to different aspects of that scene, and so it definitely was rebellious to listen to Van Halen 1984.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is very cool that your mom let you rock out.
Yeah, she was very...
in the Toyota Celica.
That's right. Well, and a lot of those memories I attach with going to our music lessons. We would we'd get in the car, my brother and I had music lessons at the same time. He played drums, I played guitar, and, we'd go down to this, small studio where we'd both have a lesson at the same time, and we'd listen to 1984 on the way there and 1984 on the way back, and in the hopes that, if we played enough, eventually we'd maybe be able to play one of the Van Halen songs. But our teachers, like my guitar teacher was teaching me to play like polkas and waltzes and classical music, and I was just like, can I please learn to play something? And meanwhile Eddie Van Halen is so gifted, like the thought that I'd even would have been able to get to that point was probably out of the realm of possibility when I'm 6 months into learning how to play the guitar. But
you're still on Mary Had a Little Lamb, weren't you?
Exactly. Yeah. But even Eddie's, the way that he played and his style that he brought, he had that classic jump that he would do, where he'd kind of
in concert,
kick his legs out, and we would emulate that all the time, where we'd jump off of the neighbors' walls and things like that, and even to the point where I ran track as in high school, and when I would try to jump over the hurdles, instead of jumping the way that you're supposed to with one leg in front, one in back, I'm jumping with my legs going out to the side like Eddie Van Halen, and I could just see the coaches looking at me and shaking their head like, this kid has no chance to be a hurdler.
Listen up, listeners. If anybody has a picture of our buddy Tim jumping over a hurdle in that fashion, I will pay top dollar for that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's not going to happen. It's like one day I got to try hurdles. Like you're out, you're gone. You just run straight, and that's all you can do.
Well, that was also, I don't know if you mentioned this, David Lee Roth's last album with the band until that weird reunion kind of stuff going on much later, right?
Yeah, I think that was in 2012 when they got back together again with David. And,
okay.
Yeah, and it was kind of the end of that, that era of the band. But I mean, I don't know how you feel about Sammy and the lead singers they had after that. But what I think is interesting is that David, his voice it's pretty much gone. He just can't sing anymore. Where Sammy, he still performs. He still sounds very similar to how he did, back when he was a solo artist, singing I Can't Drive 55 and, all that music that then became part of Van Halen after that. So,
yeah, I think, even when David Lee Roth tried to be a DJ about 10 years ago, even then, listening to him on the radio was hard to handle. You're like, oh, it's shot. He's shot. His vocal cords are shot.
Yeah, it's a shame. And I mean, there's been plenty of other artists like that they maybe it was the style that they sang. It was so much like screaming elements of that. They just they wreck their voice. But for what it's worth, he still, I thought he was great on 1984.
Oh, absolutely. He was a front man. I don't know if he was the first that was so flamboyant and showy and put on a rock show. If you went to see Van Halen, you were lucky enough to see that at that era. But he definitely was a performer.
Yeah. And I know I think we've talked that, I got to see them in concert, post David Lee Roth,
Yes.
with Sammy, and just to see those guys perform. I mean, even Michael Anthony, who didn't get a lot of credit, I don't think, but his voice, I mean, he sang a lot of the backup vocals to enhance, what David was doing, and Sammy as well, I think. He's a great singer, and great bass player. I think he played a 6-string bass for a while that really added another element to the, Eddie's doing these crazy solos, and then Michael's keeping the rhythm of the song going. And very gifted as well.
Anytime I think of David Lee Roth versus Sammy Hagar, I think of the movie Airheads.
Okay,
and I don't know if you've ever seen that. And there's a joke in there about they won't let the person in the building until they say, well, who's better, who's the best singer? And the guy says Sammy Hagar, and they say wrong answer or whatever. and it's funny, as a kid I didn't realize that, and then I thought about it, I'm like, David Lee Roth was the better front man as far as entertaining. Not to knock Sammy Hagar, he was a great singer, and they put out great songs as Van Halen later on, but something about that early David Lee Roth made it fun.
Yeah, and I think that the age, that we listened to that early music definitely left an impression as well. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to go back and listen to it. Over the last few weeks, it's been on pretty heavy repeat.
Is that one of the albums that you would say you'd know every single note to?
I would definitely put it in that category. That I don't need to hear too many to be able to know which track it is, and I mean, I sing along to every song, and windows have to be up so nobody can hear me, but it's a lot of fun to go back there and and sing those songs and enjoy it again.
I got William. Excuse me. William knows some great music in the 80s. He's just Mr. Music, and he doesn't really like the harder stuff. He'd rather listen to Duran Duran versus Van Halen. How about Jack?
I think the advent of Spotify has really given the kids an opportunity to explore music in a way that we never had. You would listen to what was on the radio and whatever albums you could get. But outside of that, I wasn't seeking out music from different genres. I was just listening to what I liked.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the kids will play a song, and I'll pause and just ask them how did you kind of listen to this? And they have this catalog of everything.
Everything at their fingertips.
And so he'll surprise me sometimes where I'll play a song and he'll pause for a moment and I'll be like, do you know this song? And then he'll quickly identify it, and it shocks me sometimes.
Yeah, it does.
And I mean, he's got a pretty broad spectrum of what he'll listen to, but it seems to be there's so much that they're taking in right now. I don't even know what I would categorize as like their favorite, because it seems like every week it's something different.
Yeah, and so varied.
Yeah.
But William definitely likes a lot of that cool 80s stuff, like Take On Me and, Africa. He knows it all, and he really likes it, so it's pretty cool.
And, there's been so many remakes. I know Weezer did a remake of Toto's.
Amazing remake, right?
Yeah. And I saw them in concert like 3 years ago, which I think was right around the time when they had released, that version of Africa. Yeah. And it was so good. I mean, one of those songs that I almost feel like it's better than the original, even though I have to laugh. There's a movie or some reference where someone talks about Toto, and the person's like, "Oh yeah, Africa," and then the person's like, "They have an extensive catalog. Why is it that only people only reference Africa? There's so many other good songs." And I was kind of thinking to myself, I'm like, "Are there?"
It's funny you should say that, because there are.
Yeah.
Toto actually has an amazing catalog that you're like, I didn't even know Toto, sang that song. We'll have to do a Toto episode one day, because they do have more than you think of when you just think of Africa.
Yeah, and to be fair, I did look them up on Spotify, and it is funny to see how many, hundreds of millions of plays on these different songs, and you play it and you're like, oh yeah, I do remember that song, and just not realizing that it was a Toto song.
Yeah.
Hey Greg, this seems like a good spot for us to take a little break. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Tim, so January of 1984 had a number of other events besides Van Halen's epic album, and one of those was a Wendy's commercial that went with the three little old ladies. I don't know if you recall that.
I think so. I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, it was the famous "Where's the Beef" commercial.
Yes, definitely.
It was definitely pretty big. Everybody would say it to one another. It was just an iconic '80s moment. With the little old lady. What was her name? I can't remember.
I think her name was Clara Peller, I think was her name. Yeah.
And she was the little lady on the right-hand side of the commercial that really stole it. She's the one who says the tagline, "Where's the beef?" Right? And it was just funny, right? Yeah. It was just an amusing commercial.
Yeah, yeah. I think, being in the fast food world, they're always looking for ways to, leave their mark and pull something from the Burger King and McDonald's. I think Wendy's was just, looking for something to really, draw attention to them and sell more burgers. And I think they did a pretty good job with the "Where's the Beef?" Because, it's one of, I'm sure there are commercials from that same era with McDonald's and Burger King, but "Where's the Beef?" I think won that battle.
Stole it. Yeah. It was the first time I recall learning of Wendy's was because of that commercial, whether it existed before and I never realized it. But the commercial certainly made you laugh and remember it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So in addition to, "Where's the Beef?" There were some other high points in January of 1984. On the 24th, Macintosh, they launched their first computer. Steve Jobs made the announcement at the Flint Center in Cupertino, and that first Mac was unveiled. And it looks in a way similar to some of the devices that we have today. I mean, that little square box, if you expand the screen, doesn't look that like an iPhone. But it was, it was very cool, to have something that was a personal computer that was not this massive, box. It was unique in its styling, which I think Apple has been true to. They've always made unique styles and things that are iconic, and just the design alone. And then, the computer itself was monochromatic, which, made me think of like when I was a kid, we'd play Atari on a black and white television. I can't imagine how my kids would react if I was like, okay, you can use your iPhone, but it's black and white, or you can play your video games, but they're black and white.
They'd look at you, eyes crossed, like, what is that?
But it does make me wonder, maybe there's a market there, someone needs to come out with a game that is purely monochrome and, throwback, or the sort of, the green color of the old, the green, Tetris on Game Boy, we need a throwback there. We need some monochrome graphics.
and the very large floppy disks.
Oh yeah.
What were they, 5.5?
Yeah, the big ones, the truly, flexible ones. Yeah, 5 1/4.
5 1/4. Okay. Yeah.
I remember we had Macs in my elementary school, and we each had our own desk, and we would play Oregon Trail. And I think we had to program some like very simple little, lines of code, and then it would animate into something. I can't say that I remember what it was that the end result was, but I just remember having a folder with this gigantic floppy disk that we would carry to the computer lab, and then we'd do these little programs, and then we'd get to play Oregon Trail at the end, and always got dysentery.
Yeah. Oregon Trail does seem to have a sort of place in 80s culture. It does pop up in different places here and there.
Yeah. I remember when I got probably one of my first iPhones, one of the first apps that I paid money for, which is rare, but I bought Oregon Trail and I played it on the iPhone, and it was really fun to just go back to that, again, just relive something from our youth. And, obviously the graphics are color, and you can tell what's happening with the graphics as opposed to the little pixels than it was when we were kids.
And you still died of dysentery.
Of course, yeah. We lost the dog,
Oh, that's epic.
Yeah.
I remember a friend of mine, their parents were pretty progressive. They had CD player way before it was normal. They had computers well before it was, in everybody's home. And I remember like asking to play this casino game that they had. You could play blackjack or, spin the roulette wheel and different things like that. And again, very crude graphics. But as a kid, it opened up your imagination quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those early games, I mean, it really relied on your imagination so very much because, you can only do so much with 8 pixels
and one color.
That's right. This was a few summers ago, but I had hooked up, our Atari to, a big flat screen TV, and it's funny, to see them in color because it's like magenta, yellow, and blue.
Yeah.
And, pixels that are now, 5 inches by 5 inches. It was fun.
We did buy the Atari system that you has got like 30, 50, 60 games on it. You just plug it in through your red, white, yellow RGB cables into your computer, and the kids actually played it a little bit, but it didn't come with the paddle. So as far as Atari goes, most of my favorite games involve the paddle. So
okay,
that was sad.
Right. Well, we'll have to do another podcast where we hook up the old Atari with the paddles, have the originals, and we can see how they go.
Excellent.
So in addition to, the advent of the Mac computer, on the 25th, Ronald Reagan announced at his State of the Union address that the United States would begin development on a crewed space station. And that was called Space Station Freedom, which later evolved into what is now the International Space Station.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Have you ever gone out with the kids and watched it fly by?
I have not. No,
Yeah.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, if there's a website where it'll track the location, and it's very fast. I was surprised how quickly it comes into view and out of view.
Really?
We have a decent telescope. It's not super high powered, but enough that we could find it. But then you got to be moving. You got to stay on
Keep
it
going
to
with it.
see
Yeah.
But I think on certain days, even the way the sun hits it, you can maybe catch a reflection off of it during the day. Maybe with binoculars, I'm not sure, but it is kind of neat to see it. And again, being that it's moving so quickly relative to looking at the moon or something like that, so it's fun.
That is cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Another pop culture event, big time, that occurred later in the month of January. On January 27th, Michael Jackson, while filming a Pepsi commercial, unfortunately got too close to the pyrotechnics and his heavily gelled hair caught on fire. And do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
I feel like there was a fair number of jokes at his expense as a result of his hair catching on fire.
Sure. Do you remember what he did when it caught on fire?
I don't. What did he do?
He beat it. A little flashback to my earlier days. I apologize.
Yeah. We are Latch-Key dads, so dad jokes are going to happen. So.
And it was a big deal. And I know he suffered pretty bad burns. And it was kind of like, the first hit to his image, I think.
Yeah, I would go along with that. Yeah. Hey Greg, in January of 1984, there were a couple of movies that came out, probably not the most famous movies of the era, one of which was a movie called Hot Dog, the movie.
I do recall that one.
Yeah, I think I saw that one too. Not a lot of note from the movie.
No.
The main actor's name was David Naughton, who happened to be in An American Werewolf in London.
Great movie.
And he appeared on an episode of Seinfeld in 1981. So
there you go.
Known fact there.
Actually, I actually think I know he was Elaine's boyfriend in that episode, right? With the he had a drinking problem.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Good memory. Yeah. In addition to that, there was another movie, Broadway Danny Rose, which was a Woody Allen film. I didn't see it.
I did not see that one.
All right. Well, sorry, Woody. And the other one of note was a Steve Martin movie with Charles Grodin, The Lonely Guy.
And that kind of surprised me because I know a lot of Steve Martin movies, and I've never heard of that one.
Yeah. I probably could check with my parents. I feel like they went and saw a lot of Steve Martin movies in the theater, and I don't know if they saw that one, but I'll look into it and I'll report back.
Please do so. Well, the month might have been a stinker for movies, but there was a lot of good music going on in January of 1984, as we kind of talked about before. Van Halen released their epic album, 1984. But a couple of other albums to mention at this time. I know you were probably a big Menudo fan. They released their Reaching Out album. There was also Anthrax, Fistful of Metal. Bon Jovi, his, I'm assuming we're going to have to do a grade check on this one, but his self-titled album, Bon Jovi, which I don't think it was a great album, but it certainly started what was to become massive sure. hits. Pretenders, Learning to Crawl album as well. So some pretty big names releasing albums. As far as the singles go, this is where it starts to get really, really heavy hitters going
sure.
here.
Yeah.
Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Oh.
Can you get better than that?
Yeah. Yeah. That video alone, oh my gosh. Talk about a theatrical video at a time when, that whole idea of a theatrical, non-movie presentation, that video was unbelievable.
Simply amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it was $1 million.
Wow.
To
I had no idea
make at that time. I do
crazy.
remember hearing that number being thrown out, but again, who didn't watch it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Over and over again, because
sure.
it was the coolest thing, right?
Yeah.
Queen was still around. They released Radio Gaga. If you're a Queen fan, there was Cyndi Lauper, Time After Time. I mean,
stood the test of time. Still being played.
And I put this one in here for our wives. The Smiths, What Difference Does It Make?
I'm sure they'll appreciate that.
I'm sure they will. And finally, for our music section, Tim, we've got the Billboard's Top 100. Should just call it the Billboard Top 10, because we're not going beyond 10. Just throw some names out there. And this was for January 21st, 1984. I'm sure you've heard of a band called Yes and the song Owner of a Lonely Heart.
Again, it's one of those songs that I hear it and it just throws me right back to that time when I heard it. And just
great
song.
Yeah. This is a pretty interesting one. Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney with Say, Say, Say. Yep. And that was, I don't know if you know this is an infamous situation. I'm a pretty big Beatles fan. And while they were recording and making the album and doing this together, Paul had mentioned to Michael, the biggest thing in music is owning the rights to songs, publications or whatever. And Michael Jackson was like, you're right. I'm going to go buy the Beatles catalog. And that's exactly what Michael Jackson did, was turn around and then bought all of Paul McCartney's songs.
Wow.
So,
yeah. I mean, I had heard that was, that Michael had, bought the rights, but I didn't know that that's how it came to be.
From Paul saying something about it, and that caused that to happen. Yeah. Pretty wicked.
Yeah.
Another great 80s band and song, Karma Chameleon by Culture Club. I mean, that takes me right back to middle school or elementary school.
Yeah. And even with, there's a movie where that is referenced so heavily. It's one of Adam Sandler's movies, The Wedding Singer.
Yes.
And I mean, I remember obviously from when we were kids, but then to see it, come back into play in that movie, it was awesome.
It's great.
And, again, a song that it got so much airplay,
And so catchy. It's a good song.
Yeah, you can't help but hear it and sing it.
Yeah. Talking in Your Sleep, The Romantics. I mean, that alone would be a pretty good song, but it's only fourth here. And this is a song I always thought that the Australian band Men at Work sang, but it's not. Break My Stride. No one's going to break him.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And it's actually sung by Matthew Wilder. But in my head, I always assumed it was the Men at Work because it sounded Australian. I don't know. The next one was, I Guess That's Why They Call It the Blues, Elton John. I wasn't lying when I said this was a great top 10.
Yeah.
Twist of Fate, Olivia Newton-John. Here's one, Joanna, Kool and the Gang, right? Everybody knows Joanna by Kool and the Gang.
Of course.
One of your favorites, Running with the Night.
Oh, Lionel makes his appearance again in our podcast. That's a pretty high percentage, two times already.
We've got to get that interview with Lionel.
I know. It's going to happen.
And then rounding out our top 10 is Say It Isn't So by Hall & Oates.
Oh, Hall & Oates, yeah. It's funny, Hall & Oates, when I got my first job, they would play music in the office, but it was like there was one station that we could get there because we're inside a building. I would say 55% of the songs that were played on that radio station were Hall & Oates. So it went from like, oh, I really, I enjoy some Hall & Oates to, I can't listen to Hall & Oates anymore. But it's been so many years since then, I can appreciate them again without getting too upset about it.
They're Philly. They're from Philadelphia. And I'm pretty sure they are the, I don't know how you would say this, but the best-selling duo songwriters of all time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty
most number one hits, songs, albums sold and all that stuff. So
wow.
People sometimes underestimate just how many hits and how popular Hall & Oates were.
Yeah.
Pretty talented.
Very cool. Greg, it's time for us to go back and do our report card for 1984.
All right.
And looking back, David Lee Roth's first concert with Van Halen after the 1984 split was 23 years later on September 27th of 2007. So they did get back together a little bit earlier than we said. Their first album back together, though, was in 2012, as we noted.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Also, anyone interested in looking for the International Space Station, you can check that out by going to the website spotthestation.nasa.gov, and it'll give you the times when it's overhead in your location.
Nice.
Also, I confirmed with my parents, and although they did see a lot of Steve Martin's movies, they did not see The Lonely Guy either.
All right.
Also, you noted that Bon Jovi's album was his self-titled first album. I just want to confirm that that was in fact correct. That was his first album back in January 21st of 1984.
Fantastic.
And lastly, the cost of the Thriller video, we had said it was around $1 million to shoot the video. The numbers are a little bit hard to track down, but it looks like it was somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000. CBS Records was only willing to contribute $100,000, which was roughly the cost of most videos back then. MTV and Showtime both contributed $250,000 each in exchange for the rights to show sort of a documentary called The Making of Thriller. So all that together was roughly $600,000, and then it's said that Michael also contributed some of his own money to get the video produced, but the amount of that is sort of unknown. So probably not quite $1 million went into it, but still, probably 6 or 7 times the amount that a video would have cost back in 1984.
Hey Tim, I don't know about you, but I couldn't wait to listen to all the great music we talked about in today's episode. So, I created a Spotify playlist to share with you and all of our listeners. To listen to the playlist, go to latchkeydads/1984.
Nice.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned. We'll be back again soon.
Tim, did you know that listeners should like, review, and subscribe to the Latch-Key Dads podcast?
No. But now I know.
No,
No,